I am super excited to be introducing you to my friend Sitesh Patel. He is the author of Succeed by Failing. He's a really successful business executive. He's went to school and earned a doctorate degree in pharmacy. He's just achieved quite a bit in his life, but he's also faced some challenges, and he has taken the time to come and speak to our audience where we're trying to teach and inspire hundreds of thousands of people in prison, showing them regardless of what challenges they've faced in the past, they can always succeed by failing. So Sitesh, thanks so much for spending time with us at Prison Professors. Thank you for coming to my home. Why don't you tell our audience a little bit about where you grew up and what your aspirations were when you started?
Sure. No, I appreciate you having me here, Michael. You know, it's an interesting story because it's one filled with lots of ups and lots of downs. So originally, you know, I sit here today, it's 2021, I'm 37 years old, but I was born and raised in Anaheim and Buena Park in California. So grew up in a very middle-class neighborhood, you know, middle-class family. You know, we had some nice things. We didn't have some money. You know, it was a very just, you know, pretty standard upbringing. And growing up in Buena Park, you know, it had some challenges. It was a diverse area, but you know, it was in the 80s and there was still a lot of racism floating around. And you know, it was interesting for a cultural shift from where my parents originally came from, which was India, to bringing up a child in the United States of America.
And what brought your family from India to the United States?
So in India, where my parents grew up, it was a small village where they had a caste system. And basically, based upon their last name, their future was already kind of foretold. So the only way to escape that is by leaving the environment and starting fresh somewhere new.
I've read about the caste system in India. How many castes are there?
Oh, there's several. I couldn't even tell you how many there are. But being a Patel, you're considered a farmer, or kind of on the lower end. And most of my grandparents and their grandparents and their grandparents grew up farming. That's the business that they knew.
But your father, my understanding is he became an educated man. How was it that he transitioned from being preconditioned to be a farmer to becoming an educated man? And tell us about his educational background.
Sure. So my father grew up in the 50s and 60s. And during this time frame, there was a transition going on in the country where people were able to get an education and start leaving the caste system. And they were basically, it was an evolution in the culture, and that evolution allowed people to start moving ahead of where they were predestined to be. So he got his education. You know, he did well in high school, went to college. He actually was a pharmacist himself. He graduated a pharmacy degree in India, and then decided to move to America for new opportunities. And at that time, the United States was allowing certain number of people per country to allow enter. And because he was an educated individual, they granted him entry into the country and gave him citizenship.
How old was your dad when he chose to leave India and come to the United States?
Oh, he was young. It was, I'd say, early 20s.
So he was in his early 20s. He came to the United States, and what did he initially do? He was already married, I take it, or did he get married here?
No, so he wasn't even married. He had just finished his school. He had his degree, and he applied to actually go to pharmacy school here in the United States at USC. So he came to America and started going to school. And unfortunately, just the schooling system didn't work out for him. So he ended up leaving, went back to India, and that's where he got married. So he married my mom, and he actually left India again to start settling in the United States and start building a life for himself. But while he was doing this, my mom was still back in India.
So he became a pharmacist in the United States or in India?
He was in India. He wasn't one in the United States. He had his degree, but because he wasn't licensed, he couldn't practice.
And so what kind of career did he build when he came to the United States and settled with your mom? Or I guess he settled before he brought your mom over. Right.
So he settled before, and he started building a career in the nutraceutical industry, which was, you know, at that time was very new, dietary supplements. There was a new era of products, new type of ingredients, but he knew manufacturing. And because he knew manufacturing and compounding in India, he was able to take those skills and bring them to the United States. So he started working in the United States, and a few years later, he brought my mom over, and my mom joined him, and she started working as well in a small company. But he was starting to build a career as a manufacturer, a pharmacist, but a manufacturer in the dietary supplement industry.
And did he work for a big company or a small startup? How did he start building his career and get stability here in the United States?
So he actually started at multiple small companies, but eventually he went to a company called DNF Industries. And DNF Industries was somewhat of a startup at the time, but they forged a partnership with a company that was just brand new to the market called Herbalife. And as many as know, the story of Herbalife is, Mark Hughes, the founder, took that company from zero to multi-millions, billions right now. And at that time, DNF was the exclusive manufacturer. So he got to see DNF grow, he got to see Herbalife grow. And as these companies grew, his knowledge and his experience grew as well.
So he became responsible for manufacturing a lot of the products that made Herbalife one of America's biggest companies.
That's right. Yeah.
And what opportunities opened with that level of experience of coming in and kind of a startup and growing? What do you know about your father's career trajectory and what opened for him?
Sure. So yeah, it's an interesting story because he started at this company that all these companies were kind of startups at the time, and they all just blew up, exponential growth. And when you're doing that, you're networking and you're meeting a lot of people because there's a lot of new people coming in the industry. There's big money. So there's a lot of people that are very interested. So he was meeting people from the manufacturing side, from the supply chain side, from, other vendors, other providers, and just working through these people, he channeled and built quite a network over the maybe 10, 15 years or so.
And from that network, it's interesting that because you're really giving us some leeway into some of the lessons that you teach in Succeed by Failing about developing skills, building a positive network, developing stronger communication skills, and new opportunities open through that effort. Tell us about some of the opportunities that opened for your father.
Sure. So basically, when he was able to work at DNF with some of these other associates and some of these other businessmen, he was able to showcase his skills. So when you're showcasing your skills, other people start to see that positivity. They start to see, okay, this guy has something going for him. Let me talk to him a little bit more. Let me learn a little bit more about him. Let me see how he can bring value to not only his company, but my company as well. And by doing that over the course of several years, you're able to build up a reputation. You're able to build up relationships, and eventually you can reach certain points where those relationships will open doors for you. And that's what it did for him.
What were the doors that opened for him, and how old were you when you recognized these doors opening?
Oh, I was just a kid. I was still in elementary school at the time, maybe 4th or 5th grade. I had a younger brother. He was 3 years younger than I was. So imagine him being, kindergarten, 1st grade, 2nd grade, somewhere around there. But what happened was my dad was able to more or less build some really strong relationships where these businessmen who did really well were able to say, hey, why don't you leave the company? Why don't you start doing this? Why don't you start doing that? I'm going to give you a bunch of business.
And what was that start? These people were recommending that your father become an entrepreneur and start his own venture?
Exactly. They were recommending, for him to leave, use his formulation skills, use his manufacturing skills, take it outside of DNF and start his own thing. And by doing so, that's the risk that he took. But there was at least some leverage and some security there because he knew that the people that he was partnering with were going to support him.
So he had orders from this network, the support network that he had built. They effectively promised him, if you start your own business, we're going to give you you're going to be able to manufacture for us. And so he had this pathway to build a successful career.
Exactly. Yeah.
And what do you remember about the development of this business while you were growing up?
So when he started, it was not a large-scale manufacturing facility. It was, a blender in a corner in a warehouse where, when he had spare time, he would go kind of as like a side hustle and mix stuff together, purchase, test it, do everything that he needed to do, pack it. And he was literally doing it all himself. He had himself and his other helper would be actually my grandfather, who was a lot younger at the time. So it's between the two of them, just really working one blender, pulling materials together, creating blends, creating finished products that he can then resell to, the people that were in his network that were supporting him and buying from him.
And yet did he ever become a pharmacist?
He did. Okay. So yeah, he studied for his boards. I think it was maybe late 80s, early 90s, but he ended up studying for his board. He took the exam, passed. And yeah, I ended up becoming a pharmacist.
So he became a pharmacist in America. Do you remember how old you were when that happened?
I was young. I was still in elementary school. So it was all around kind of the same time frame.
and yet he became kind of an American success story, immigrating into the United States, starting his career in education, continuing on, working for some American businesses, and then became an entrepreneur on his own. And that, of course, led to him developing a large company that employed many other people in society. And we're going to hear about that in the upcoming interviews. But before we just close out this first introductory segment, Sitesh, could you tell us a little bit about what your father's commitment to excellence and commitment to building a business, how did that influence you as a young boy and what you wanted to do with your life?
Sure. So, you know, even since we were young kids, it was always the impression of hard work, hard work, hard work. You know, you create a vision, you stay focused on it. And there's going to be a lot of influences that try to sway you right, sway you left. But regardless, you keep following down that path. And it was applicable to everything, you know, from school to any projects we were working on. If we're trying to build a fort, whatever it might be, the idea was you don't start and quit. You start and you see it through the end. And it's going to take hard work to get there, but the end result is worth it, right? So that was always applied to us, even just growing up as kids, you know, being young children, me and my brother, that you need to work hard. Nothing's going to be given to you. It's all work, work, work.
And so you applied that not only in your hobbies and so on, but what about your academic life? Tell me about your performance in school at the different levels of elementary and high school. How did you do?
So I was actually really smart in math and science, but I didn't do so well in English and the writing skills, right? So there were some areas where I definitely had strengths and excelled, and some areas that I lacked. But I knew that math and science skill was something that, you know, I wanted to pursue, that I enjoyed doing. So I kept at it. You know, it's something where I would read stuff and then follow up on it. Sitting at home, I'd open up some random science book that my dad had, whether it was National Geographic or just even an encyclopedia, and just read something that interested me, because science I found just fascinating. And I was good with math, I was good with numbers, so the two just kind of came together, and those ended up being my sweet spot. So I stayed focused on that. I tried to do the best that I could just growing up, trying to write and, you know, learn English. I was, you know, taking Spanish classes. Wasn't always doing so great, but, you know, I managed to escape by and do good enough. But really, I stayed really focused on my strengths.
We're talking to Sitesh Patel, the author of Succeed by Failing. He's an American success story, and he's an inspiration to me. I'm grateful to Sitesh for coming to my home and allowing me to interview him. We've got a series that we're going to be sharing about his journey, as you've just heard, beginning in the United States as a first-generation American. In the next episode, we're going to be talking about his journey to become a pharmacist himself, then his career path, and the successful life. But we're also going to hear about what he means by succeed by failing. We communicate this program to people in jail and prison because we're determined to try and help people understand, regardless of what bad decisions you've made in the past, you can always work toward building something more for your life. And we're going to hear about that in the inspiring story of Succeed by Failing. The author Sitesh Patel, he's been gracious enough to come by and tell it to us in a series of short videos. We'll be back with the next one right away.